Hello, welcome to the HR Strategy in the Hot Seat podcast. My name's Anwen Bottois, I'm your host, and I'm the founder of Purple Sky Consulting. I'm a leadership promotion specialist, and I also have a bit of a side hustle where I focus on development of HR leaders. So as the title of the podcast suggests, this is going to be all about HR strategy and how we can help HR professionals to consider the strategic elements of HR in more depth. Now let's get started with this episode. Roxy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. So happy to be here.
Lovely. So why don't you do a little introduction for our listeners in terms of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Roxy Allen. I work in the gas industry across talent and workforce transformation with a focus on connecting strategy to behaviour and execution to support broader business agility, workforce resilience, all that kind of good stuff. And I use my exposure and experience in product thinking, business agility and systems thinking, which I picked up in the tech space, to further drive performance.
Love that. And I love this topic, so I can't wait till we get into some of that in a minute. But why don't we go back a little bit then in terms of how you ended up in the role you're in at the moment or in that area of talent? Tell me a little bit about your backstory.
Sure. Oh, goodness. Okay. We're probably going to have to go back a couple of years, I think.
Go for it.
So I suppose in 2019, I so happened to read a book by Nick Shackleton-Jones. This is all about how people learn and that kind of modern way of learning and development. And as I was reading it, and I stumbled on this, there was an infographic in the middle of the book that kind of covers the kind of heart and head of a modern day learning and development practitioner. And there's a box towards the bottom end, which details all of these different methodologies. And I was like, I recognize some of this language, but I've never heard it used in this space before. And I started to do a bit of a deep dive on Agile and then 5DI. And I realized in a weird way, in a Roxy way, I was kind of doing some of it already. I just didn't know what it was. And I suppose because my brain is a very structured type of brain, I built all of these kind of processes and ways of working just through trial and error and being frustrated and wanting to fix stuff and all the rest of it. So as I kind of went down this rabbit hole, I ended up finding design thinking. I ended up becoming an ambassador for Agile People Ops, which created a whole wealth of experience and exposure. Through that opportunity, I was able to start a mini podcast, which is a very small podcast, but I spoke to some great founders in the kind of product and tech space as a part of that as well. And I was able to kind of bring my learning into the workplaces I was in. So I was in a game studio, and we ended up basically using Agile HR as our main ways of working across the whole team and bringing
Amazing.
that kind of end-to-end, more employee experience kind of focus approach through a couple of taster sessions that I did for the team. And that contributed to us being shortlisted for HR Team of the Year in 2022. So it's been a lot of, I go and learn a thing, I experiment, I give it a go. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I try something else.
Yeah, I love that. And that is the best way to learn or grow, isn't it? Is actually, you've just got to put the stuff out into the field sometimes and see what comes from it, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. And is there something specific about kind of that structure and that identifying the structure for how you put stuff into action that you find really interesting to you?
Yes, it could well be that I have a bit of a non-neurotypical brain, but I am very good at pattern recognition. And one of the things that I have found more naturally is finding overlaps and alignments and even vague adjacents where I can bring these things together. And I think this is one of the reasons why I'm very interested in that kind of broader organizational effectiveness, and as well as things like socio-technical systems. So how you integrate the people side of things with the technology side of things. And a great example of this was I realized when I was looking at socio-technical systems that there's a lot of overlap between that and business agility, the same kind of language around teams focus and all the rest. but it's just kind of from a slightly different vantage point. So yeah, I've been able to kind of bring those thoughts together and almost, as I say, create my own ways of working, create my own kind of frameworks off the back of that. And I'm a very first principles type person. So I kind of like to go off and figure it out, build something that is bespoke to the situation I'm in, because of all of that kind of overlap and checking and kind of saying, oh, that kind of similar to that. Maybe I could, Frankenstein something there.
Yeah. I love the personalization. So that's what I'm hearing come through there in terms of like, you absolutely can have a framework and a starting point for something. But if you try and force onto a situation something that isn't a good fit or a natural fit, actually, you're probably not going to get the results out of it. So you really do need to be looking at the elements that are contributing to that context or the situation or just the individual sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is at the core and the center of all of the things that I've been looking at, is that human-centered or user-centered design, and really focusing on the individuals, the challenges that they're having, and then building solutions with and around them for that purpose, as opposed to kind of, as you say, trying to shoehorn in a framework because we've known about it for 30 years or whatever.
Yeah, no, excellent. And you're our first kind of in-house practitioner that we've had on the podcast, which I love, because I think it's really important that we're looking at the realities of what's going on in organizations and shining a light on the experts that are in organizations, not just looking at the experts who are supporting and delivering to organizations. So I really love that we've been able to kind of get you onto the podcast to have this conversation with us today. So thank you so much. Tell me then, Roxy, what is it that you want to put into the HR strategy hot seat?
Yeah, I think I've been hinting about this a little bit. So it's systems thinking, more so for performance, but with a little kind of hangover with the broader HR space.
Okay, awesome. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about what that means to you?
So historically, HR hasn't really had much experience with systems thinking because we're very siloed in the HR space, very discipline dependent. And it is great to see that things are shifting in the right direction because we have Agile HR, as I kind of mentioned, or Agile People Ops, employee experience, so everything that Josh Burston is talking about, and then the organisational effectiveness piece, which I think is emerging a little bit more off the back of a lot of digital transformation and kind of looking at things in the round. But systems thinking, for those unfamiliar, it allows us to think about things in a very holistic way. So viewing elements of a process or a challenge as interdependent, with the ability to kind of influence each other. So effectively, everything is connected. And if you change one thing, something else moves. So not quite as extravagant as kind of like the butterfly effect or anything like that, more the Charlie Day meme in that regard.
And we'll make sure that meme is linked somewhere as well for people to go and have a look at for that, to see those connections. And yeah, I love that. How do we get to grips and understand the input and what outputs that creates, but also what side effects that we maybe weren't expecting, because there is a knock on, isn't there? There's always going to be something going on, and how do we understand that in a way that's useful? So yeah, that's fantastic. So what do you think we don't get right at the moment in HR functions because we're not taking a systems thinking approach?
In regards to performance specifically, I think we're not able to really see how the system itself, and when I'm talking about the system, I mean the organization itself, is built to encourage those positive outcomes that we want to see in performance, whether it's a high-performing team or whatever else it is. And there's something in the Agile space that you'll often hear, which is manage the system, lead the people. And I suppose when I started looking at the kind of systems thinking way of working, I realized that not everybody can actually see the system for what it is. And then if you can't do that, you don't know what your role is in it either. And if you want performance, you have to kind of zoom out. You don't start with the targets, you start with conditions, and then that's what drives behavior.
Lovely. I love that. The conditions. So what what are your kind of key thoughts around how HR functions can kind of look at those condition elements within that system? What are your thoughts for that?
So I stumbled on something. I say stumbled because it was quite a journey to get there. So I was trying to find or build a simplistic way to show how high performance is cultivated, as I say, in the organization by leadership and what their responsibility is within that. And I was already familiar with the Agile Business Consortium. I'm a member there, and they have a really great resource, which is the Agile Culture Matrix. That's more macro level. It's more of an organizational wide assessment. And I wanted to kind of come down a little bit more into that meso micro level. And then I remembered there's a really good chapter in Sooner, Safer, Happier by Jonathan Smart. And that's a really useful business agility book. And this chapter covers off value stream mapping. But then I realized, oh, that's a little bit too sprawling. And I kind of want to go plan on the page, kind of easy to digest kind of thing. So I know this is turning into some sort of Goldilocks story right now. But
No, we love stories here, so that's fine.
But so after a couple of combination words in Google and trying to figure out, what it is that I actually wanted, I found 6 boxes, performance thinking, and they have a performance chain. And I noted that some of the elements were a little bit more strategic than I personally would have included. So I did a little bit of sort of amending and using it as a base really to overlay the things that I felt as an organization we needed to focus on. So those are kind of the agile elements, particularly in the behaviors piece. And the way that this is structured is if we go from sort of left to right, you have enable, behavior, output, and outcome. And when you're looking at the enable piece, these are the leadership responsibilities that create the right conditions. So it could be psychological safety, coaching, flexible goals, and that then enables the right behaviors in our people. So I really did think that this was kind of missing from some of the previous models that I've looked at before. But this is sort of your team level signals, your collaboration, your accountability, decision ownership, adaptability and responding to change. And then that delivers on outputs. And this is your measurable evidence. So this is how you know the system is actually working. You've got things like maybe better feedback loops or improved stakeholder engagement, potentially even more innovation as well. And then that's how you deliver on those outcomes. Those strategic outcomes are your organizational value. So it could be faster time to value, it could be sustained engagement, or longer term organizational resilience. And as I sort of built this out and into the kind of using the approach that best for the organization, I realized you could actually work it backwards. And I thought, oh, you could do gap analysis with this. So that's an opportunity. So if people are familiar with sticky steps, which is something that using kind of the product and kind of tech space, so you're effectively working backward from outcome to enable and asking what needs to be true for this to happen to then do your gap analysis. And there is a video on YouTube from Six Boxes Thinking that details that process as well.
That's so interesting because sometimes we get into a space where we just go, aha, we need to do X. But do we spend enough time figuring out if we are putting the right inputs in, setting up those right conditions for us to really get to where we get to? And it really resonates with some of the work that I do on leadership development, because for me, that crossover between leadership development and organizational performance are kind of like in lockstep, in my opinion. And I think sometimes we miss the opportunity to kind of get into that space. And the work that I tend to do with leaders to start with is like, who's the leader you need to be? Who's the leader you're gonna be remembered as, thought of, and how does that cross over with the requirements of you as a leader in the organization as well? So there's the sense of self as a leader, but there's also the kind of what does the organization need from me? And that's the bit that I see as the outputs. And then we spend that time doing these. So what needs to change or what needs to be different with you that enables you to get to that point? So it's really, I love that kind of interlinking between how you could think about performance, but also how you can think about that from a development perspective as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really love that. Okay, cool. So if you were implementing this or recommending to somebody else how to go about this type of systems thinking for performance, they'd maybe never approached this type of work before. Where would you get them to start? What would be your recommendations for them?
Maybe it's worth explaining how I'm using it currently as a really good use case, because the organisation I'm in is a traditional organisation, being in the gas industry. So some of the approaches that I take are probably would fall into that bracket of being a little bit different. So in my current work, we've used this to reshape how managers have conversations about performance and focusing on the how of the goals by aligning that to the behaviours. So this allows for a bit of extra reflection and taking it down that extra layer so that we can have much more meaningful conversations, in addition to providing the actual infographic and detailing all of the different kind of behaviors and what we're expecting in those different buckets. I also provided coaching prompts, as well as a bit of practice for managers to do, and then a feedback framework as well. So the situation, impact, need, again, being able to kind of use the two kind of together. So using the performance chain, which effectively I guess is a causal chain, to kind of colour how the feedback was being structured and put together within the situation, impact, and need.
Okay, brilliant. And what results have you seen, or what response have you heard from the organisations, individuals? What does that felt like for you, Roxy?
So we've had some really positive feedback in terms of the structure and being able to see, oh, that's my responsibility. That's what I need to do in response to that from my manager or whoever it may be. And this is what is expected of me. This is what good looks like. And I think it's that transparency as well that has been really, I suppose, eye-opening, for want of a better word, in regards to this, and making that kind of, making performance less of this kind of ambiguous thing that it can sometimes be in the kind of performance process.
Yeah. And it goes to show that clarity around structure is really valuable for people, isn't it? In terms of, actually, I can show up and do my best when I've understood what it is you actually need from me.
Absolutely, yeah. Setting out those conditions and the situation so that we're setting them up for success.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Okay. So that example where you've kind of implemented that and you've seen good results from it, what challenges did you hit up against? Or was it just really easy because it just fell into place with people? But, I know people, so I suspect there's some interesting points you came across.
So in terms of how this was, I suppose we need to talk about how it was embedded in the process. So in terms of the performance support that was provided, we wanted to make sure there was a range of different things that people could come to. So whether it be a lunch and learn, a management specific workshop, and then a bit of a drop-in kind of thing. So I designed this workshop using the kind of training from the back of the room TBR approach. So that is my go-to, by the way, in terms of how I structure learning, to make sure that it is that kind of adult to adult. I'm not coming into the room expecting you not to know anything. I want to learn from you as much as, the other way around. And I wanted to make sure that this was as practical as possible. So we had a number of different activities within that. And if people are not familiar, you've got kind of like 4 key kind of quadrants of how it's designed. So you have the kind of community piece, which is bringing people together. You have your concepts or key concepts, which is your input. Again, this is really light touch. So I was able to keep the infographic just as high level as I've kind of described with a couple of examples. And then we do the concrete practice. So this is where they were practicing using some of those coaching prompts, using the feedback approach, and layering in some of that language from the infographic with the performance chain. And then we do our conclusion. So I always ask, what is the one thing you want to take away? What is having a commitment, how they're going to go forward with their conversations, etc. And then doing a little follow-up with the evaluation as you normally would do. So because this was such a kind of, I suppose, more of an energetic kind of design approach to the workshop, It kind of allows me to distract people with with all of the kind of energy and all of that kind of thing, and then really pack in some of those key elements. And because they're getting it in such a succinct way, it gets really sticky, for want of a better word.
So they're in a place where they can absorb it
Yes.
easily because it's simple, it's structured. You're giving them the opportunities to play with it and explore it. Did you hit on any challenges?
Not within the actual performance chain itself. It was the only kind of challenge that was presented was actually the framework that was used for the feedback. And I think this comes down to there's a lot of feedbacks that are very similar, and it just some people do SIN, some people do SBI. So it's just, yeah, that was just kind of the little kind of is this the same? Is this different? And clarifying, should there be any confusion? But outside of that, there was no kind of challenge in terms of accepting the chain. It was more of a aha moment in that, okay, I can actually see how this tracks up right through to the strategic outcomes, which you can't always get. Yeah.
What brilliant results, like taking that type of approach to things and kind of really giving people the right direction and the right setup for how they could take those performance conversations further. Are there any lessons learned that you've found from it, or kind of any builds now that you've done that element of it? What were the takeaways for you, Roxy?
I've wanted to make sure going forward that it doesn't become one of those things that we've done it now and that's it, because that defeats the purpose of systems thinking. So how do we continue? So how do we continue to reinforce this, even if we don't use the infographic and it's the language? So I try to make sure that any workshops or sessions that I'm putting on, that I'm kind of referring back to what we have in that performance workshop. So I'm always sneaking in active listening and just keeping it really high level. And I try to also include, where possible, things around psychological safety, because again, I know that these are sort of key elements that are so important to enabling the system to not only function but to thrive.
Yeah. And I heard you say language and how important it is within our organisation to have that kind of common language that reinforces a system, but also helps us to kind of shift from maybe where we were with things as well, and kind of how important language is in helping those shifts to happen.
Absolutely. Interestingly, we're working at the moment on a work experience program, which I've designed using design thinking as a structure for it, which feels a little bit Inception, but it ensures that you've got it as a learning kind of framework, but also you're able to encourage and train, I suppose, young people on how to use those skills within design thinking. And because it is so abstract, I've just gone, do you know what? I'm not going to call it design thinking anymore in the business. We're just going to say creative problem solving. And that has completely shifted. So I'm able to kind of pilot different sessions internally to see, are people going to be on board with this and so on. And technically, they don't know it, but I've already been doing it for a while anyway. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that is so important within our HR strategies as well, isn't it? That we choose language that will bring people with us rather than make it feel like it's something like, what? Systems think? What? But actually that creative problem solving, that's a lot easier to get on board with, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. I won't say too much on the podcast, but we've got a couple of pilots for a couple of things that are very interesting.
Ooh, we might have to bring you back on then in a period of time then, so we can get the hot off the press in terms of that, definitely. Any final thoughts, I guess, in terms of kind of either your passion for this systems thinking approach, or kind of how others can kind of get into this thinking?
Okay, I'll answer both if that's okay. So in terms of my passion around it, it's taken me into such a strange direction because of the introduction of AI. And I feel like AI has given me almost superpowers in that if I see something that is, I recognize that as a pattern, I'll go to AI and say, I think this reminds me of this, and can you tell me about the gaps and where it kind of diverges, and who are the theorists and all of this kind of stuff.
That.
And it's creating, I'm going into wormholes, disappearing away. So I've got to be careful with it, but it's absolutely really useful. And like yesterday, this is completely off piste, but I was watching a video essay on The Matrix. So I'm a bit of a film buff, so if I see anything The Matrix related on YouTube, I'm going to watch it. And within this video, the person is talking about the recommended reading that the main cast of The Matrix had to read prior to starting filming. And the book, or one of the 3 books included, was Out of Control. And this is by Kevin Kelly. And the book is very optimistic about AI, which is really interesting. And it was written in 94, I believe. And I went on Blinkist, and there's a short kind of summary on there. And I also decided to speak to AI about it because, it's probably, has some detail that can help me better kind of understand this. And I guess because I've been talking to AI about systems thinking, it was like, this aligns to your thinking in this way, and you can apply it to this. And I was like, that's very useful. But I've also gone to the kind of other end of the spectrum in terms of the same kind of systems thinking with Technopoly by Neil Postman, where he's kind of focusing on the lack of human judgment that may come with the overuse of AI. So I'm kind of found myself in a really nice middle, because I'm focusing within the realm of systems thinking and socio-technical systems around human judgment, decision quality, and maintaining that learning loop. Because with AI, as just evidenced by me just talking to AI, not talking to a person, it can be a bit of an interceptor in that. So that's kind of the direction that I'm going in at the moment with my own personal learning.
Interesting. And how about how others then can start getting to grips with this approach? What are your thoughts on that? Where would you get them to start?
So I think that one of the best ways to start thinking about systems thinking and thinking about the whole organization is actually through things like the Agile culture matrix. So it is, I believe it's 4 levels, and it goes from surviving to thriving, and it covers a range of different things that go across your organization. And just having the opportunity to either speak with your team, speak as a department, as a leadership team, just walking through, okay, well, where do we sit in terms of well-being? Where do we sit in terms of collaboration and learning? And it may be that you're really strong in certain areas and not so strong in others, and you can create a bit of an action plan off the back of that. And I think that's where things started to really solidify for me. And when I reviewed that the first time, my goodness, that must have been 2020, when I first kind of looked at it, I was like, okay, this is really helping me see everything in the round. And then you start to see the overlaps between those two or 3 or different things that maybe aren't working as well.
Yeah, I think that's and we'll find that matrix, and I'll link to it as well if we can get a resource on that. I use something similar. I think they've got similar principles in that kind of productization area of maturity model. So, where could we be? Where are we? Where do we want to get to at the next point? Because maybe being world class at this isn't something we need to be doing as an organization, but we could have it as a frame of reference for something. So I think though, getting into a place where you really understand where you are and where the path is for success right now, because it might not be the big thing. It might just be that we just need to shift this by a little bit.
Absolutely.
And that will help us unlock things. What I love about what you're describing there, and I think the matrix, the maturity matrix can do some of this as well, is look at those interdependencies.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you having a knock-on effect? Or where could you say solve the same different problems in the same way at the same time?
Yeah.
Like I love that element of, why do we have to look at things in a singular way? We should be looking at it, how they're all connected. And that's what I love about how you describe that systems thinking. I think it's great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So is there anything else that I've not asked you about that we should be putting out there into the world
Oh, goodness, on the spot. I'm still formulating a lot of my thinking, and it may condense into a framework of some sorts, particularly if AI keeps helping me do all this pattern recognition on speed, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely.
But yes, I share a lot of that on LinkedIn and things like that.
Fantastic. So one final question for you before we get to where people can find you. What would you say would be your one tip or your one focus area for HR leaders to really effectively implement their HR strategy?
I think that we need to stop adding lots more activity, get really good at doing the basics, start asking, what behaviors are we actually creating through the system that then determines whether the strategy is working or not at the end of the day. So yeah, that would be my advice. Stop adding more activity and just review where you're at.
Yeah. Less stuff done really, really well.
Yep.
With the space to evolve it, I think and being able to come back and be analytical in our thinking around what's worked, what hasn't, what contributed to that. It's so valuable to be open to that rather than just running on to the next thing because we feel like we need to do 5 million things when we don't.
Exactly that.
Roxy, where can people find you? You said LinkedIn before. So what name will they find you under?
Roxy Allen, yes.
You are Roxy Allen on LinkedIn. Yeah. I will also put that link in there as well. And we'll find some of those other resources that you've mentioned and make sure people can find those easily. So thank you so much for joining us on the pods today.
No worries. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining this episode of HR Strategy in the Hot Seats. Please leave us a review. Let us know what you think about this episode. What did you think about the topic? If you have any thoughts on topics, themes, questions, guests you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please do let me know. Get in touch with me via LinkedIn or drop me an email at anwen@purpleskyconsulting.co.uk. Hope that you could join us on the next episode and make sure you share this with any of your network too. Thank you.